Welcome in. It is week 6. It is the DFS show. It's myself, Jeff Bell, and I'm joined by Devin Knotts, our DFS captain. And unfortunately, our good friend Phil Alexander is not able to be here tonight. Our thoughts and prayers are with Phil. He is in the path of Hurricane Milton. And so hopefully everything is going fine with Phil, and hopefully everything is fine there. Everything will move past quickly, and there won't be too much cleanup, but we are here for you. We're here for week 6, and we're going to look at primarily DraftKings at our cash games and GPP lineups for DFS. But Devin, we didn't do a giveaway last week, did we? I don't think we
No,
did.
we didn't.
I was going to say, I don't think we did.
No, and I'm not prepared to do one. But if we want to do one, we certainly can. Yeah, I
We don't
mean,
need to do a giveaway this week.
we'll do one next week.
We should not do a
going
giveaway
on.
when Phil is not here. So
There's too much going on. Going on.
But certainly there are a lot going on in the world right now, but we are happy to talk about it.
How about this, Jeff? How about this? We're going to make cracking FanDuel free this week.
There you go.
We're 4-1 on the season. Another winning week last week. We'll give everyone a little bit of a preview, if you're not a subscriber, what you're missing. Of course, you could fade that since I'm making it free. You know, we're not going to go undefeated this year. We'll put it that way. Last year we were 13-5. And we say 13-5, that's compared to 50-50 lineups. So 13 winning weeks, 5 losing weeks. Best year ever for the article, but we're off to a pretty good start at 4-1. So we're going to try and top that 13-5 mark.
And I can do math, and 13 is quite a bit more than 5. So, that is just good to go with there. But make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for being here. First off, we start with our games of the week, and I'm really excited because teams can throw the ball again, and teams can score points again. So that's exciting for the NFL. But Devin, what games are you targeting this week to build your lineups around?
Yeah, I think the big question's at quarterback, and we'll jump right into it. We're not going to go an hour, so we'll talk about just some random things today with only 2 people. Baltimore, Washington, I think, is the decision that everyone needs to make. The over-under is almost 30, or I'm sorry, Baltimore's team total is almost 30. Washington's right at 24, so over-under, I think, is at 53.5, 54, somewhere in that range. Baltimore's defense is pretty atrocious, and we saw Joe Burrow tear it up last week. So we'll see. I think you could go on either side of the ball with either quarterback. Wide receivers are also in play there. Detroit, Dallas, I think, is the other one that I think you kind of have to at least consider. Should be a back and forth game. Would it surprise anyone if it was a 35-31 type game? Certainly not. The other game that's up there with the team total is Green Bay, Arizona, but I'm not feeling that one at all. I don't know. Maybe it's just, Jaden Reed obviously is going to be in play going forward, but I don't know. I get weird vibes with Arizona. I never know what to project with that team just because they're all over the place. So who knows? I think if I'm paying up for the premier positions, it's certainly in those other 2 games for me this week. And I'm not going to pull a Phil and name 7 games this week. So we're gonna stop it there.
The other ones that I'm kind of have my eye on, Atlanta, Carolina, particularly Atlanta side of that. I think we've seen Carolina, the good vibes from Andy Dalton seem to be wearing off a little bit, and you're just kind of seeing a bad Carolina team versus what we saw last week with Kirk Cousins going up against Tampa. And then just the Philadelphia side of the Philadelphia-Cleveland game, because that's another one that I don't know what's going on with the Browns, but that is maybe a get-right game for the Eagles coming off their bye, and it doesn't seem to be going great for the Browns offensively, and I am certainly not going to mention Deshaun Watson this week as a potential cash game quarterback play.
Can we talk about Atlanta just really quickly? Yeah, and again, absolutely. We're going to be all over the place here. Bijan Robinson's going to be popular. Very popular. I don't know that he should be because, what's his at 6,600, I understand the price is good, and that's probably why he's going to be so popular. But Tyler Algier is certainly having a significant role, and we've seen his snaps increase. You're the worrier on this podcast. What's your worry level with Bijan Robinson?
My worry is that his shoulder is hurt and it's not really being picked up by people. And that is a primary driver for why you're seeing decreased usage. I think maybe you could make an argument on game script, particularly last week where they were making a comeback. But at the same time, he was not in the game late on those comeback attempts, whereas Tyler Algier was. I think Tyler Algier is a good NFL running back and not even just like a decent, like a good NFL running back. And the Falcons realize that. I think Bijan Robinson's banged up, and I think that Falcons have playoff aspirations. They've had playoff aspirations all through camp. I think things are starting to go well there, and I think that they want Bijan Robinson for the stretch run versus kind of wearing him out right now. So you're seeing a couple different factors there that play into Bijan Robinson just having a lighter role. And the way that they got the pass game working last week against Tampa, I would expect them to go back to that as well. And I think that that's been a big focus for them to get Kirk Cousins comfortable, to get that passing game going. It's just a variety of things that have led to this diminished work share for Bijan Robinson.
Fair enough.
What's your read on?
You're more of like the long-term focused. I'm just narrow-minded. Like, am I going to play this guy this week or not? And if I just see him at like 30% rostered, sure, he could have a breakout game this week. But like, do I really expect it? I think the roster percentage is just too high. I mean, I would almost go, would it surprise anyone if Tyler Algier had 2 touchdowns this week? Maybe not.
That's the thing. A GPP pivot to Tyler Algier at 5,100 might be an interesting way to attack that matchup.
Yeah, I mean, the question that you're going to have to ask yourself in cash games is whether or not you want to fade Bijan Robinson because he's going to be so popular. And I'm of the mindset that like you can, because I don't know, I find scenarios where playing cash games at times, whenever you're playing a cash game, the first thing you have to do is build your own lineup without actually having too much involvement from the outside. And then what I do is I take a look at it and say, okay, who are going to be the people that are extremely popular? Because am I okay with losing if player X has a huge game? Or do I think I can get an advantage on the field if player X doesn't have a big game because he's going to be so highly rostered? And at 6,600 this week, like as of Wednesday, and again, it's Wednesday, so take that with a grain of salt, but like we're not seeing and maybe you're seeing it, but I'm certainly not seeing like the must start players because of injury or misprice. It's like everyone we're back in that like weird value conversation. And this week I'm spending up at quarterback, and maybe that's where we just transition into cash. But I mean, for me, it's either Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels, and I think it's Jaden Daniels for me this week at 7,300 at quarterback. Baltimore's allowing 306 passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. And they have one of the best run defenses in football, so people are just trying to throw the ball. How else is Washington going to move the ball? Because we know Washington has had – I throw this Cleveland game out because Cleveland is like just a complete dumpster fire. Like you can't judge a defense whether they're good or not based on this Cleveland offense. It's just not possible. But Washington's had issues stopping the run this season, and we could see a Derrick Henry game. And I think as a GPP play, he's going to be one of my favorites this week. But I think I prefer Daniels just because they're going to be behind, they're going to be throwing, and having that player that is behind certainly is an advantage as you think about, Joe Burrow 392 and 5, Dak Prescott 379 and 2, over 2 of their last 3 games. I don't know what Josh Allen was doing in week 4, but somehow Baltimore stopped him. But they've allowed 275 passing yards per game to every quarterback except Josh Allen this season. So I think it's Jaden Daniels for me by like a clear margin. But Lamar is always a player that I struggle with because his variance is as high as any player on the slate, meaning he could put up 40. He could also put up like 13. And you just sort of never know with him. And when they have a lead, he typically doesn't run the ball nearly as much as when he doesn't. If you wanted to pay all the way down, it's scary. Really scary. But at 4,800, you could go with Will Levis this week. Coming back.
I saw that one. You can go even lower, I think, maybe, if you wanted to get really scary.
Talk to me, Jeff.
There's a min price Spencer Rattler that's going up against Tampa that is a severe pass funnel defense at $4,000. I mean, it is risky. Is risking it for the biscuit, but a min priced player in an offense that we have seen be explosive going up against a defense that we have seen just give up 500 yards the last time they were on the field to Kirk Cousins. You know, if you're looking for value on the slate, and you kind of mentioned that we're not seeing it with injuries on other places, I mean, there's your injury value this week.
Okay. I mean, yeah, Rattler, he can throw the ball. I mean, he's a gunslinger, but what's interesting about Rattler is if I'm taking Spencer Rattler, I would almost want to take Tampa Bay's defense too, because he's going to throw 2 picks if they let him throw the ball that many times, but he's probably going to be sacked like 5 or 6 times like we saw at South Carolina. But he can also throw the rock. Like I'm not
6 touchdowns and half of them could be for Tampa.
I'm not endorsing it, but I'm not endorsing it. We'll put it that way. Will Levis, I think, is in a similar situation. He knows his days are numbered. Going up against what could be like his last great matchup. Indianapolis has made Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence look like Joe Montana over the last 2 weeks. 310 yards or more. Joe Montana is probably an outdated reference at this point, but 310 or more in each of their last 2 games to Fields and Lawrence. And, you know, at some point, this team has to throw the ball. They've invested heavily in Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, and you run the risk of maybe he gets benched halfway through the game. So there's certainly that risk, and maybe he's more of a GPP play than a cash game play. But it's now or never for Will Levis, put it that way.
I agree with that. I do wonder, we led off talking about how popular Bijan Robinson is going to be. I see Kirk Cousins at 6,200. And to me, that is about the cheapest safe, quote unquote, quarterback that you can get. And I don't know if Kirk Cousins is really safe or not, but I kind of feel like he is. And especially against Carolina, that feels safe. Do you see that as somewhere that usually I'm thinking pivots, I'm thinking in GPP, but pivot in cash, if everybody's going to be on Bijan Robinson, then maybe I play the Kirk Cousins at 6,200 and take that maybe the best quarterback value that I don't feel like I'm just really risking it, and while also fading Bijan Robinson potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the logic. I look at each player individually in a vacuum when it comes to cash games. I think that's certainly a great GPP strategy. But like, would I be more enticed to play Cousins just as a pivot against Robinson? I understand the point, because if you're fading Robinson and Robinson goes off, you're kind of screwed anyway. But I think Cousins is a good standalone play. I think he's a good safe play. If you like, hey, I can't get up to the guys I want to get up to. I can't get up to Jaden Daniels. I can't get up to Lamar Jackson. Even Dak Prescott at 6,700 is a good play this week. And I want to spend down a little bit, but I don't want to go all the way to the bottom. I think Cousins is that guy, and he's not going to kill you. He has upside. Carolina's pass defense is hit or miss. I mean, we've seen some good performances against them. They've sort of turned a little bit. Caleb Williams throwing for 304 and 2 last week was certainly certainly a surprise. He was the first quarterback to throw for over 250 against this Carolina defense. But I think it's a good play. I just don't know that I would do that pivot just because I'm fading Bijan Robinson, if that makes sense.
Sure. Which I think it would be the way to approach it, especially in cash, making sure that it's a good standalone play in general, but also an opportunity to get leverage. Moving into running backs, we have talked about Bijan Robinson. I guess maybe the big question would be, are you on team fade Bijan Robinson at cash, or are you putting him into those cash lineups?
You're putting me on the spot, and this is where I wish Phil was here because I would certainly defer to him.
Filibuster to Phil.
I think as of Wednesday, I am fading Bijan Robinson. That's scary, and I understand he's going to be 60+% rostered in cash. So certainly he's a great play, and I'm not going to talk anyone off of it. However, if his shoulder is banged up, if he does have issues there, does Atlanta really need him against Carolina? That's sort of where I go back to. Probably not. And we could certainly see a lot of Tyler Algier this week. I like Tony Pollard a little bit more at 6,000 going up against this Colts defense that's just atrocious. I think that the primary issue I have with Bijan is just one, he's not catching passes nearly as much as he has in the past, which as a cash game running back, you certainly want that. And two, 12 carries and 7 carries over his last 2 games. He could certainly have a bigger role, but that 12 carry performance was in overtime in a game that they scored 36 points. So, he hasn't had a big game since week 2 against Philadelphia on that Monday night game. And I don't know. I just have this inclination that he's going to struggle against the Panthers. It's more of a gut feel than anything, but hey, sometimes you got to take chances in this game. I certainly wouldn't fault anyone from doing it. I would rather have Chuba Hubbard at 6,300. Hubbard has been awesome. I mean, just with Andy Dalton and without Andy Dalton, his stats are just completely flipped. I understand Jonathan Brooks might be coming back this week, but 114 rushing yards, 104 with a touchdown, 97 in a touchdown last week. He scored a touchdown in each of his last 3 games. He's touching the balls 26, 22, and 17 times. The 17 was in a blowout. So even in a blowout, he had 15-7, 19-7, 19 and a half points on DraftKings. To me, they only have so many playmakers in Carolina, and he's certainly a guy that I would trust at that price point. Atlanta's defense, they allowed 116 yards to Rachaad White and Bucky Irving last week. I think Chuba Hubbard is just as good, if not better, than both of those running backs. They've allowed 70 rushing yards or more in each of their last 5 games. Every game this year, they've allowed 70 rushing yards or more. So it's certainly a defense that you could take advantage of. Chuba Hubbard will be a core play for me this week. Looking elsewhere.
Fun with stats on Chuba Hubbard. You talked about those numbers. So in 3 straight games, he's had 97 or more rushing yards and 4 or more catches. The last player to do that for 3 straight games was Ezekiel Elliott in 2018. So that tells you the kind of run that Chuba Hubbard's on right now.
Yeah, and there's people that just won't play him because his name is Chuba Hubbard, right? And we've seen the Bryce Young Chuba Hubbard experience, and that was a disaster last season. But that entire offense was a disaster last year. The other guy I want to play, and I don't know if I can get there. I mentioned it at the top, but it's Derrick Henry, 8,000. Henry's been great. I mean, he scored a touchdown in every game. Um, he's had 151 yards, 199, and 92 yards over the last 3 weeks. Washington's defense has been. Like I said, I throw the Cleveland game out, but James Conner had over 100 yards. Devin Singletary had 95. They really haven't faced an elite running back like Henry this season. So Conner's probably the closest to it, but Rashad White, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, Conner, and then the disaster that's Cleveland. So they have some issues there. No Montez Sweat, no Chase Young this year compared to last year. Jonathan Allen and Jerron Payne are getting up there in age. So I think that this is a defense that, they lost Frankie Louvu, or no, they added Frankie Louvu, and he's been great. But I think it's certainly a defense that could be run on this week. And then the last name I'll throw out there, I've already given 3, so I don't really need to give another one. But no, Jeff, do you have anybody? Because I really don't. I mean, those are the three guys I really want to target: are Pollard, Hubbard, and Henry if I can afford him.
I think it might be a little bit risky for cash because it's a split backfield, but Bucky Irving at 5,400. I just talked about Spencer Rattler starting for the Saints. 5,400 Bucky Irving. We've seen the explosion out of Irving. He seems like the type of player that can really kind of make your week off one play. And I think that could be a matchup where if Rattler is not able to click, and then you really just kind of have a get right game for the Bucs that involves the run game quite a bit. I'm kind of interested in Houston on seeing what Houston is going to do. And it's not on Cam Akers anymore, I don't think. And seeing if Joe Mixon can get there. I'm probably not playing Joe Mixon if he gets healthy. Damian Pierce, I'm a little bit more iffy on actually putting him in the lineup. But if both of those guys are out again, Dario Ogunbowale at 4,800, I think is a little bit interesting there, where you're seeing Nico Collins out of the lineup. I think Ogunbowale kind of fits a little bit more of a 3-down skill set than Cam Akers does. And it did kind of seem last week that basically they said, we gave Cam Akers 2.5 games. We're not seeing what we want out of that. Ogunbowale, we'll put you in and we'll go with that a little bit. So I think that would be a contingent play only. But really for me, that's the only maybe injury situation that I'm watching to see if I can get somebody in, because the other one that you would think about would be maybe Trey Sermon, who is also injured potentially, but at 6,000 straight there, I'd much rather just play Tony Pollard than Trey Sermon there going up against the Colts. We can move to wide receivers now here. And how are you building this wide receiver lineup out?
So we have a couple injuries, right?
Devontae
Adams,
wide receiver injuries.
Yeah. I don't know if you have more, but certainly add them. Michael Pittman out week to week.
Yes.
Devontae Adams questionable. I don't know if we have an update on him, but seems
doubtful, needs traded. So
right. Doubtful, has other issues. Who else am I missing?
Nico's out. Nico Collins is on IR, so that opens up that Houston receiver room.
Got it. So I think there's a couple ways to approach this. The first name that I want to target is Jalen Tolbert at 5,000. One of those primetime games where the guy has a breakout. I think he had 10 targets last week, and they desperately need something. Doesn't look right with CeeDee Lamb. He's complaining on the sideline, whatever he said to Dak, who knows? But after that play, he really wasn't involved in the offense at all. And this is a potential high-scoring game. No one can seem to run on Detroit. They have one of the best run defenses in the NFL, but one of the worst pass defenses. So I want at least a share of the Dallas pass defense. If Joe Flacco plays, and I don't know that we know that, I want one of these Colts receivers. Now, the question is which one, because Alec Pierce had 134 yards, but it was on 3 catches last week. So I think Josh Downs is probably the guy that I'm targeting. But he's dealing with a toe injury. So if he's healthy, I think he's the clear guy to
Yes.
go this week because 8 catches and 9 catches over each of the last 2 games. And at 5,500, the price is just too good. The I want a share. I think I want a share of Atlanta, and I believe that player is going to be Darnell Mooney.
I love that. I
Um,
had 2 players highlighted when I started, and it was Darnell Mooney and it was Jalen Tolbert. So good on you.
it's just like I can't spend up, right? I've talked about the guys that I like at running back. There's not really that cheap option, but Mooney at 5,300. How does he have 8 catches and 9 catches in 2 of his last 3 games? Certainly, like he's limited. So again, it's Wednesday. Everybody's hurt in the NFL, especially as we get in like these mid-season weeks where guys are not practicing nearly as much. So certainly take that with a grain of salt. But like at 5,300, he's certainly a player that I don't think is going to kill you. And I like him more than a player like Jacoby Myers at 54, who just seems more volatile. And we don't know what that offense is going to be because Aiden O'Connell is starting, confirmed.
Yes.
Or okay, this is why you're on the show, just to fact check me. You're like the moderators for the presidential debates.
My very best. Called being a
But
host.
so Jacoby Myers also didn't practice on Wednesday, so like he has an ankle injury. So if he doesn't go, then Trey Tucker becomes a guy that you have to consider. So as we sit here on Wednesday, I think it's Mooney, it's Tolbert, and it's Downs, assuming that Flacco does start. I don't see why he wouldn't. I mean, the Colts have been competitive in the last 2 games. If you're not going to get a fully healthy Richardson, like what's the point? Because his legs are so critical for him. But anywhere you're targeting that you wrote down, and then I'll jump back in if
My
I have somebody
my
else.
biggest hesitation on Downs. I like that call if Flacco's a quarterback, but we have seen L'Jarius Sneed in the Titans' pass defense has been very, very good. I believe actually the Titans are number 1 on fewest points allowed to wide receiver, and maybe that's because teams have been able to run on them. But usually we've seen Titans' defense has been very, very underrated, and it's been Will Levis that's been giving games away. That the reason why they've been losing games. That's you talk about a toe injury with Josh Downs. Like those would be my biggest concerns on Downs, especially hitting a cash lineup. I see a similar value pivot to Jameson Williams at 5,800. I think that maybe Jameson Williams is a little bit riskier in terms of volume, but looking through this, I certainly want something from Detroit. I'm looking at that Dallas matchup. I want a piece of Detroit at least, and Jameson Williams is definitely the most accessible piece, and we know Jameson Williams' game. One play can make that worthwhile, and he certainly can have more than one play. So that's probably my only pivot there. Looking maybe again, we talk about spending up. I'm seeing Jaden Reed at 7,000 is a little bit interesting to me because I don't know what that Packers passing attack is going to look like, especially I assume Christian Watson's going to be out. If Romeo Dubs plays or is not, I don't know that that really impacts it all that much. And to me, Jaden Reed, at some point, Jaden Reed looks like the type of player that needs to be getting 12 to 15 targets a week because he looks that good. But maybe they never click that in that way. Maybe they want to pride themselves on not having a number 1 receiver. But I think that that's probably about as high as you can realistically get, unless maybe Stephon Diggs at 7,400 without Nico Collins in that lineup and kind of being the primary weapon for Houston.
Yeah, that price just is it's a little high, at least for me. I think that I like the Jaden Reed call at 7,000. But at 74 for Diggs, like, I don't know. Maybe it's just a little bit high for going up against New England on the road for me. The other thing, I mean, I don't know if we have any games that will be high wind as of Wednesday with the hurricane. I would assume it's going to be all cleared out by then, but like keep an eye on that just to see if there are any high wind games in the Northeast or how that hurricane does progress.
As I understand it, so the last one that we had last week like kind of came up, and like we even got it in Columbus. It kind of came up
we got
there,
it in Chicago.
Whereas this one is kind of more supposed to just go straight across Florida and then kind of be out in the Atlantic is what I believe is supposed to happen. So it's kind of and just kind of hits right that path across and goes out. So I don't know that that's too big of a concern by the time we get to Sunday, but you never know.
Yep.
Moving into tight ends now. I like Tucker Kraft. I said last week I like Tucker Kraft. He had 2 touchdowns last week. 4,800 is I like that price.
I think if all the receivers are out, so Doubs and Watson are both out, certainly it's a better play. 4,800 is getting up there to the point where, is it point chasing? I don't know. But it's certainly a doable price. Jake Ferguson, 5,000 if you don't want to go with Tolbert. Just getting pieces in this game. Especially if Lamb is, whatever is going on with him. And we'll talk about Lamb and GPPs because I think he's a great play for everything that I've said and had concerns about. But I think Ferguson's going to be pretty far and away the most popular guy. Right now, he's trending to be about 35% rostered in GPPs, which means he'll be 50 plus in cash. And just because that game is going to project to be such a high scoring game. So for me this week, it's probably just taking Ferguson and not risking it with Kraft. I completely understand the play, but I don't want to be on an island with no Bijan and no Jake Ferguson. I think that opens too many doors.
At some point, Mark Andrews is 3,900. And I mean, at some point, you would think a Mark Andrews game is going to happen at some point. I mean, maybe it's too risky for cash.
I mean, didn't it happen last week? 4 for 55. That's like the best that we can.
It did a little bit.
It's like the best we can get from Mark Andrews at this point. I mean, he was 4,000 last week.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Of like, imagine, so we're week 6. Like this isn't like week 12 here. We're in week 6. You got Brock Bowers at 6,000 is $300 more expensive than any other tight end on a slate that features Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews. Imagine telling somebody that 6 weeks ago. Like that just blows my mind.
Yeah, I think I would prefer Kyle Pitts at 44. 7 for 88 last week. Granted, everyone had big games against Tampa Bay last week, so kind of have to take that with a little bit of grain of salt, but like just to see him involved, I think is something that we really haven't seen in quite some time. So again, it's Ferguson for me. If you want to go cheap, you certainly can, but I don't know that I'm doing it. If you really wanted to go cheap and just say like forget this position, if Deontay Johnson is out, Jatavian Sanders at 2,600, I think is at least a sneaky play. I mean, you would have. It's basically like the way to think about that is, okay, let's say Ferguson is going to be 50%, and you're just like, hey, 50% for a $5,000 tight end is too much, right? Ferguson's he's not a guarantee to have a big game by any means. And we know the position is volatile. So if Johnson is out and Jatavian Sanders has, I don't know, 4 catches for 30 yards, 7 points. And Ferguson has 5 catches for 50 yards, 10 points. You're really not that far behind, and you save $2,400. So I'm not doing it, but I wouldn't hate anybody that did.
He's the last player on my list for tight ends, or the bottom of my list. But I think it's interesting because, we kind of let out the show talking a little bit about the lack of value, but you do kind of potentially look at value in non-traditional places between a $2,600 Jatavian Sanders and a $4,000 Spencer Rattler if you really wanted to get that value and hit some of the more expensive players in some other spots. But before we open up the board and dive into GPPs, make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Hall of Fame subscribers get access to all DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually. And we're, like Devin said, we are going to give you a free preview of cracking FanDuel. So make sure to check that article out, and that'll give you just kind of a snippet of one of the very best pieces of DFS content that hits the site weekly, but 2, just what you can come to expect from our DFS coverage. So please check that out. But anyways, now it is time to open up the board, and it is time to look at GPP plays. And we start off with quarterbacks. Where are you going GPP quarterbacks?
I think it depends on roster percentage, because if what's happening holds, it's a unique situation where, and we've seen it all year, where Baltimore's defense gets too much credit. So when people are clicking names or putting percentages into their models, whatever the case is, they see Baltimore and like, it's probably a tough matchup. It's not. And Jaden Daniels right now is trending to be about 4% rostered. If he's 4% rostered, I'm going to be pretty heavily invested in Jaden Daniels in GPPs this week. I talked about it. I'm not going to rehash that, but certainly a guy who has upside to be the number 1 quarterback on this slate. Another guy who's going pretty low rostered this week, Dak is going to be up there, but on the other side of the ball, Jared Goff at 6,400 right now is trending to be about 5%. And we haven't seen that huge game from Jared Goff yet, right? So he's thrown for over 300 once, but he didn't throw a touchdown and he threw 2 picks in a loss against Tampa Bay. The team's coming off a bye. They're getting healthy. And it's a big game going up against Dallas. So if this game turns into a back and forth shootout, I could see Goff throwing for 304 pretty easily. And at that point, if it is a shootout, you're just hoping that he outscores Dak on the other side. So I think stacking this game is probably smart. Whether it is Dak or whether it is Goff, and they'll be in my top stacks of the week. And I think you can go bottom of the barrel chasing a little bit this week. You can go with Will Levis, who's potentially going to be 2 or 3% rostered. If Deontay Johnson plays, I don't hate going back to Andy Dalton. No one's going to want to do it. It's ugly. People think he's turned into a pumpkin. But, we've seen big games from Dalton. And the Bears defense is really good. It was a windy game. We talked about the wind potentially being an issue, and it happened. So I think that you could certainly look at Carolina this week against that Falcons defense.
Where's Jalen Hurts sitting, like in models?
12. He's up there. He's the second highest roster player. But I think Cleveland is on the verge of quitting, and I don't hate it.
He's good. Should get AJ Brown and Devonta Smith back this week.
My only concern with him is whether he's going to need to throw the ball enough to be GPP relevant, because that offense on the other side,
or they push him into the end zone 4 times, and
fair.
You mentioned Dak Prescott. I think Dak Prescott's interesting. I think Dak Prescott gives you a path to, if you wanted to. thoughts on Washington is one, I'm not entirely convinced that they're a good football team versus they might have gotten some things that have broken in their direction. I just think there's a chance that Derrick Henry runs for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Washington doesn't even move the ball at all, and it ends up just being how they're every single week. There is the game that everybody circles in DFS as this is the blow up game, and that game ends up being 17-13, and you're like, what is going on here? And I think last week maybe it was a little bit of the Packers Rams where everybody was kind of on the Packers and expecting the explosion, and you just kind of had that quieter game out of all the pieces. I don't know. I think that I'm skeptical that Washington is a world beater, I guess is the way that I would say that, verse things have broken very well for them over the last month. But
my counter to that is this is a defense, again, allowed 276 yards to Gardner Minshew. Like, I think they'll move the ball. My issue is with Daniels' red zones because they've been atrocious in actually scoring touchdowns. Daniels has been great at running for touchdowns. Throwing touchdowns have been a different issue. If he gets up to that 9 or 10% range, I'm probably out on him. But at 5%, I think you're getting a discount because of that Baltimore effect. Completely hear you. I think the risk is certainly there. He's a guy that has that upside at such a low roster percentage that I'm in on.
where did Jordan Love come in last week on rostership, and where is he sitting this week?
This week he's at 4.2%, and last week he was at, I don't know where he ended up, but I had him projected to be the number one guy.
I wonder if that's a situation where you going up against Arizona, you're kind of one of those, I got bit last week, I'm not going back there again. But that could definitely, I mean, I think Jordan Love is the type of player that 400-yard passing, 4 touchdown day is always in play, especially
I don't
against.
ever play Jordan Love, so that's just a personal bias. I don't know. It's just a thing. I don't ever think he has that upside. I know he does, but we all have those things with certain players, and he's just not. He's not a guy that I ever
Get it.
target.
Running backs. What are you doing with running backs?
Well, you mentioned it. It's Derrick Henry. I think that he's a guy that, and I think I talked about it. Well, I definitely talked about it earlier, but Derrick Henry's my favorite play this week. He's expensive, and that's the issue, but at $8,000, I think he tops 100 yards pretty easily and could have that upside of the 150 plus yards in a given week. Looking down the list a little bit. Actually, I'll throw one more name out there at the high end. So I think Saquon Barkley at 82. You can't play Barkley and Henry in the same lineup.
That was going to be my question. Is there a path to get Barkley and
Henry?
Henry?
Yeah, Spencer Rattler. Like if you wanted to go Spencer Rattler or Will Levis, you probably could do it. But Cleveland's, like I said, Cleveland's in that verge of quitting. And you could see a team that just completely quits this week. Whether it's like, hey, we don't want Deshaun Watson as our quarterback anymore. We don't want Kevin Stefanski as our head coach. There's, Mike Vrabel is a consultant to the owner of the team. So, like, who knows what's going on internally in Cleveland? I can't imagine that goes over too well to have, a very pretty successful coach being a consultant to the owner. Like, that certainly can't sit all that well. Barkley has that huge upside that you certainly want to target. J.K. Dobbins. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's kind of my general thought on looking at this slate, because we don't really have that that cheap guy that you have to get in your lineup, or like that
Yep.
injury that has opened up that, and maybe it is I think it would be a very rare situation, but maybe it is a situation to try to play both Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry and just swing for both of them going for 200 yards and 3 to 4 touchdowns each, because both matchups look like they have the potential to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's certainly in play. The last guy I'll throw out there, I'm surprised we're already 44 minutes into the show.
I can I talk a lot.
J.K. Dobbins. I mean, he's a guy that just always has big play potential. And the matchup is a pretty good one. So price isn't overly prohibitive. And he's a guy that people don't like to play for one reason or another. I mean, I know Denver's defense is good, but I'm more afraid of their pass defense than I am their run defense. So he's certainly a guy that I would like to target. And I talked about Chuba Hubbard. He's an outstanding play too, but that's what I have.
Rico Dowdle going up against a Detroit defense that everybody is going to want to avoid. But Rico Dowdle is the type of player that can make an impact in the passing game. And at 5,900, I wonder if that isn't a potential pivot into a game that you want pieces of, that maybe the Cowboys walk in because they can't run the ball anyways, going up against the Lions defense that can't run the ball on nobody can run the ball on the Lions. Maybe they have a plan to utilize Rico Dowdle in the passing game. We've seen him catch touchdown passes each of the last 2 weeks. To me, that seems a little bit counterintuitive in an interesting way.
Yeah, certainly. He's another guy that people are not going to want to play because of the fear of the committee, but there is no committee in Dallas.
No.
It's Rico Dowdle's backfield. The last name I'll throw out there, Chase Brown on FanDuel, if Zach Moss is limited or is out, because they have that Sunday night game. I think he will be incredibly popular. But at 5,400, I think he's the better running back of the two, and certainly could be taking over in weeks to come.
Wide receivers, you're looking at the top of the board. I mean, we have CeeDee Lamb. We kind of talked about the inability to get going with Dak Prescott. You've had Amon-Ra St. Brown up there, and you have AJ Brown up there coming back. Is there any reason to get any one of those guys into a lineup, or is this kind of just to continue in that value tier around that $5,000 to $6,000 range?
The problem is, when I say the problem, like, most people are going to gravitate towards that 5 to 6K range, and for good reason. There's a lot of upside guys who are interesting, but there's not that at the running back position. Like, you go sub 6K this week at running back, and it's a disaster. So more people are going to be inclined to spend up at running back, spend up at quarterback, spend way down at wide receiver, and then figure out tight end with however much salary they have left. It's interesting because you have these guys like Amon-Ra and CeeDee Lamb, who are both theoretically in really good positions. And, it's, if that game shoots out, you're going to want some pieces of it. So I think it's more of like a stack situation than anything. Like, if you're going to take CeeDee Lamb, you probably should have either Jared Goff or Dak Prescott. If you're going to take Amon-Ra St. Brown, you should probably have one of those two. If you're going to have both, it's hard, but you could probably do it. And you'd, again, want to have one of those quarterbacks.
Jalen Tolbert's going last year, but
yeah, Jalen Tolbert is going to be popular for the exact reasons I said earlier. It's Lamb is too expensive, and Tolbert is theoretically has upside. I think Jaden Reed at 7K is a really interesting play, because people are not going to want to pay $7,000 for a receiver in Green Bay when we have this ingrained in our mind that Green Bay has like 10 receivers that they could throw to, but they're really not doing that this year. AJ Brown, I think it's 6% rostered, is going to be intriguing, has a significant size advantage, and especially if he gets to face Martin Emerson, who's been one of the worst corners in football this year. We saw what Malik Neighbors and few other receivers did against this Cleveland defense. Terry McLaurin had a big game last week. Looking down the list a little bit, at some point, one of these Titans receivers has to get going. And maybe not. Maybe it's just like a disaster from the start. But what we're seeing is these high-paid receivers just not show up, right? So CeeDee Lamb got a big contract, hasn't performed. Calvin Ridley got a big contract, hasn't performed. At some point, they have to, one would think. Calvin Ridley at 6K, he's going to be like 1% rostered. No one's going to want to play him. But the matchup we talked about is really good. And he's certainly a guy who has big play potential to have that downfield threat. Jameson Williams, his last name I'll throw out there. You talked about him, but he's trending to be about 5% rostered, which, if that's the case, certainly going to be a good play this week.
Rashad Bateman at 4,100 had a pretty good game last week, and you're going up against the Washington. I don't know. I've been trying to go against Washington's defense in the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't really worked out very well for me. I don't know if they got it together against the wide receivers and quarterbacks, or
they faced Cleveland.
Well, they did face Cleveland. Yes, that is a good call, but that's one. You want to go way cheap. We talked about Jontavian Sanders in the tight end area. Jonathan Mingo at 3,700. That might be about as cheap as maybe you can go at wide receiver. Maybe if you really want to get very risky at wide receiver, Jalen Polk, if there is a connection between him and Drake May, that might be a different direction to go. And then there's a trio of wide receivers for me that are sitting in between 6,700 and 6,500 with Drake London, Chris Olave, and Zay Flowers. And Drake London, I think, is where you're starting to see the Justin Jefferson level targeting from Kirk Cousins going on there. And if you're looking at a script that a lot of people are playing Bijan Robinson in, maybe Drake London is a pivot at a similar price point to get a higher upside player that can potentially go off there. I think Zay Flowers is really the answer to what's wrong with Mark Andrews. Is Zay Flowers is the number one receiver for Baltimore, and I think that's an interesting play at 6,500 and kind of a pivot off of Derrick Henry if you're not going to go that direction. And then Chris Olave at 6,600 going up against Tampa, that is one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. And Spencer Rattler gave a sound clip that he was basically just like, Chris Olave is different. I'm just going to throw that dude the ball. And maybe that works, maybe that doesn't work, but I don't think Olave is the type of player that will be rostered by many. And that is a very, very enticing potential matchup. And if you really wanted to get risky and play Spencer Rattler at 4,000, go with Chris Olave potentially. And maybe that is just a differentiating direction that will allow you to break open some of these different values at other spots. Tight end, we kind of ran through it on cash games. I don't know if there's anybody else standing out at tight end. Maybe, again, the Saints, Taysom Hill, if he's healthy and playing and they want to involve him a little bit more without an actual quarterback in there. But I don't know what else you can go at tight end.
Yeah, Taysom Hill is always a GPP play almost every week, regardless of matchup. Two guys. I think Dalton Schultz is interesting. We don't know how Houston is going to throw the ball with Nico Collins out. So they could more heavily involve Schultz. And then in a similar vein, we don't know how Drake May is going to throw the ball. And we've seen one game this year where Hunter Henry had upside. Could it be a lot of just trying to get the rookie easy throws? Certainly a risk, but Henry's really cheap. They've faced three really good defenses the last 3 weeks. In the Jets, 49ers, and Dolphins. So we haven't seen that passing game really flourish recently, but they've been waiting for this game. They've had it circled for May to start after that 3-game stretch of the brutal defenses that I just mentioned. And you can't really run the ball against Houston, so the way to beat them is through the air. And start the Eagles defense, by the way. Just do it. Like the starting defenses against Cleveland has been insanely profitable this year.
Unless you start Spencer Rattler, then start the Bucs.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good theory, right? It's -1 for a pick six.
I enjoy
So,
it. I rather enjoy it. So there you go.
and you get the ball back really quickly. So
Yeah. 6 touchdowns to both teams. So here we go.
there you go.
All right. Stacks of the week. What's your favorite stack of the week?
Favorite stack of the week. I am going to go with. I think it's this Dallas Detroit game. I think it's pretty straightforward. Don't overthink it. Um, whether it's, I think I slightly prefer the Dak side of it, just because I trust the running game less in Dallas than I do in Detroit. So it's expensive, but Dak, Jalen Tolbert, Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Mine is bit me last week, but going back to the well, Jordan Love, Jaden Reed, Tucker Crafts running that Packer passing attack against Arizona that I think could potentially break open. And I think that that's a direction that many will feel like they were bit last week and not want to go there. And we didn't talk about Dontavian Wicks. Maybe we don't need to talk about Dontavian Wicks, but that might be another potential GPP play if you really wanted to say we believed in him a week ago. It didn't happen, but it still can. So I think the Packers going up against Arizona, I like their potential to put up multiple points. Lastly, we have our discount plays of the week. And what's your favorite discount play of the week?
I don't really have one this week. I mean, there's nothing at running back. Like literally nothing. Even in like the 5,600, 5,500 range, you're looking at Javonte Williams and Jerome Ford, which there's no chance I'm playing either one of those players. I guess I'll cheat. I'll say if Jacoby Myers misses, Trey Tucker.
4,200 Trey Tucker going up against Pittsburgh. That scares me a little bit going up against Pittsburgh.
But
defense.
who else are they going to throw to besides
You're
him
right.
and Brock Bowers? Like
Pittsburgh.
Fair. I don't love it. Like I said, I don't love any of the value plays this week. I'm sure you're going to have a better one than me.
I just like Spencer Rattler. I think it's fun. It's have a min price quarterback going up against a defense that just gave up 500 yards passing to Kirk Cousins. So I'll go with Spencer Rattler for my discount play of the week. But certainly, Phil, hopefully everything is well. We miss you, but Devin, why don't you send the people out?
Yeah, week 6. I don't know. I don't have much to say, but it's a unique week, and we've been saying that the last couple of weeks where you can get creative with your builds. There's going to be some people that are artificially highly rostered just because there isn't that value that normally we see at this point in the year. Normally there's running backs that are last minute scratches, and there certainly could be that this week, right? Friday, Saturday comes, someone misses, and all of a sudden a 4K guy throws the slate in a loop. But for the most part, the pricing has been good, and it's going to be a unique, fun week. And we stayed under an hour, so we'll give you guys 90 seconds back, and good luck, everybody.